Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving straight into a geopolitical drama that honestly plays out like a high-stakes political thriller. We're going to be unpacking some incredibly intense recent events in the Middle East, looking through the lens of a fascinating source analysis that breaks this history down into a three-act drama. We're talking grand strategies, fatal miscalculations, and some truly massive global consequences.
So right off the bat, picture this. What if a major Middle East peace deal was actually a meticulously planned, hidden military trap? According to the source material we're analyzing today, what the world thought was a genuine step toward peace was, in reality, a calculated geopolitical snare. It's a huge claim, right? Let's look at exactly how this analyst argues one side walked straight into it.
Act 1. The catalyst in Hormuz. Every good drama needs an inciting incident, and this is ours.
Now, things escalated incredibly fast. On July 7th, the source reports that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, kicked off a series of attacks on commercial ships right in the Strait of Hormuz. And we aren't just talking about a one-off event. First, a Qatari LNG tanker named the Al Ruqayyat was struck and actually caught fire. Then, a Saudi-owned tanker was attacked. And finally, a UAE-flagged vessel was hit. This rapid-fire sequence of strikes was the physical catalyst, but to really understand why this blew up, we have to look at the unwritten rules of the water.
It all boils down to two totally conflicting rulebooks for navigating that space. Iran was demanding that all ships use a very specific route through the straits, and crucially, they could only pass with explicit Iranian permission. The United States, on the other hand, absolutely insisted on freedom of navigation, keeping the Oman corridor totally open for anyone to use without needing Iran's consent. The source notes that when a Qatari tanker used the U.S.-approved corridor instead of bowing to the Iranian route, the IRGC opened fire. The analysis suggests the IRGC thought, this was just business as usual, a little intimidation to gain some leverage during a ceasefire. But man, that was a critical miscalculation.
Act 2. Springing the strategic trap. This is where the illusion of standard diplomacy totally shatters.
Here is the core twist, according to the source. This ceasefire was never, ever intended to be a lasting peace agreement. Instead, it was a tactical pause. While the rest of the world, and allegedly the Iranian regime itself, thought diplomacy was winning the day, the analysis claims the U.S. used this breathing room to quietly surge a third carrier strike group into the Gulf, move in extra marine expeditionary forces, and just let the global energy markets calm down. It wasn't a surrender, it was a reload.
To back this up, the source points to a pretty fascinating quote from Middle East geostrategist Zainab Rabua. Right when the initial agreement was signed, she said, "I'm 100% skeptical of peace deals when it comes to the IRGC, and regard them more as stops along the way where the U.S. buys time, either to build up its military presence or to give the energy market room to breathe." The analyst highlights this not just as cynicism, but as pure pattern recognition. The trap was entirely predictable if you knew what you were looking at.
Military and economic retaliation. Let's dig into the massive two-pronged counterattack that followed.
The scale of the retaliation, detailed by the source, was absolutely staggering. The U.S. response wasn't just a proportional slap on the wrist. The source describes it as absolute punishment. Over 80 targets were hit inside Iran. That is 4 to 5 times larger in scope than any previous strike during that ceasefire period. The U.S. took out air defense systems, coastal radar sites, and neutralized over 60 of the IRGC's small fast boats, which is basically their primary swarm fleet. With heavy strikes concentrated on Qeshm Island, Bandar Abbas, and Suri, they systematically crippled Iran's immediate military projection in the strait. But get this, the military strike was literally only half the equation. The source emphasizes that the U.S. instantly followed up with a crushing economic blow by revoking the oil sanctions waiver, the temporary license that had allowed Iran to actually sell its oil on the global market, which, by the way, was their main economic prize from the peace deal in the first place, was canceled immediately. In one single afternoon, the financial lifeline of the regime was completely severed.
And to put the final nail in the coffin, the source points to this blunt statement from then U.S. President Donald Trump speaking at a NATO summit. Neutrally reporting his exact words, he declared, "As far as I'm concerned, it's over. It's just a waste of time dealing with them. They're liars." With that, the facade of the ceasefire was officially dead and gone, and the reality of the trap had fully sprung.
Act 3. The geopolitical endgame. Now the source takes us into the long-term, big-picture strategy playing out on the world stage.
$200. Keep that number in mind because according to this analysis, it's what this entire conflict orbits around.
For 47 years, Iran's ultimate leverage has been the threat of shutting down the Strait of Hormuz, sparking absolute panic that oil could skyrocket to $200 a barrel. That kind of price spike would cause century-level economic devastation across the Western world. That threat, that is their ultimate trump card.
So the strategy the source lays out is brutally elegant. Completely remove that trump card. The U.S. objective isn't just to win a quick skirmish. The goal is to force Iran to personally bear massive military and monetary costs every single time they even threaten the Strait of Hormuz. By making the cost that high, the U.S. aims to render Iran militarily inert. They're basically making any attempt to close Hormuz the direct cause of the regime's own destruction.
And if that works, the cascading global consequences are wild. The analyst points out that if Iran's leverage is neutralized, Beijing suddenly loses its tacit influence over the strait. Major proxy groups, we're talking Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, would lose their primary source of funding and weapons. Plus, Russian influence in the Middle East would take a massive hit. This is geostrategy with the highest possible global stakes.
Internal fractures in Iran. This external squeezing is perfectly designed to trigger internal chaos.
Because of all this pressure, the regime itself is cracking. The analysis makes it clear that there is no single, unified Iranian government right now. There are deeply divided factions at war with each other. On one hand, you have the military faction, the IRGC hardliners constantly pushing for retaliation and conflict. On the other, you have the diplomatic faction, parliamentary negotiators who are absolutely terrified of a full-scale war and are desperately trying to keep talks open. The source claims the U.S. strategy purposefully maximizes the split by dialing up the pain every time the military faction acts out.
And this isn't just polite, behind-closed-doors political friction. It is visceral. The source highlights a wildly dramatic report to show this chaos. Iran's own foreign minister was literally chased down the street by IRGC hardliners. Those hardliners viewed the diplomats as straight-up traitors for even considering talks with America. The analysts suggest the regime is effectively eating itself from the inside out.
And that domestic chaos translates directly into heavily degraded physical capabilities. Just look at the hard data the source provides. Their fast boat swarm fleet, which is their main delivery mechanism, is now degraded below the minimum threshold they need just to execute their own military doctrine. Their mine stockpile, 90% destroyed. Those drone factories, reduced to rubble. They aren't fighting from a position of strength anymore. It's desperation.
Which brings us to the core of the overarching U.S. strategy identified by the analyst. It is a deliberate four-step cycle. Step 1, degrade Iranian capabilities. Step 2, pause, offer a ceasefire to let them breathe. Step 3, use that exact breathing room to restock U.S. military assets. Step 4, wait for the IRGC to inevitably overstep again. Take out another layer of their capability and repeat the cycle until the regime is completely finished. It is a calculated, ruthless, rinse-and-repeat master plan.
Which leaves us with one massive, profound question to chew on. With its core leverage completely dismantled, what actually happens to the global balance of power if the Iranian regime finally collapses? The trap was sprung, the capabilities are in ruins, and the ripple effects are going to be felt worldwide. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope breaking this down has helped bring a really complex geopolitical drama into sharp focus for you. Keep asking questions, and I will see you next time.